Hey, just a quick reminder as you work on this week's Thought Primer. Number one, don't forget the Canvas discussion board. Remember that half the credit for your Thought Primer comes from you submitting your responses to the questions that I pose to you, and the other half of the credit for that Thought Primer comes from your participation in that week's discussion on the discussion board. I noticed a lot of folks last week didn't hit the discussion board, and they only got 50% for their Thought Primer, and that's going to really add up over time if that becomes a habit. So you want to make sure that you're turning in your questions on the Thought Primer to me, and that you're also participating in the discussion board. As I've indicated earlier, how you participate in the discussion on the discussion board is up to you. You can respond to a question that I pose, you can start your own discussion thread, or as I've been seeing folks do, you can respond to the posts that your classmates have offered. I would strongly encourage you to read the posts that your classmates are offering. Folks are delving into all kinds of really interesting, provocative questions and ideas, and the more we can sort of grab onto those and explore them and unpackage them and take them deeper, the more we all benefit from getting greater insight into some of these really complex issues. Make sure you're participating in the discussion board, and keep in mind when folks send something out into the Canvas universe via the discussion board, it can be really disappointing to have that met with silence. So if you can, respond to your classmates' posts, even if it's something as simple as like, oh, that's a really interesting idea, I hadn't thought of that. Or I was thinking something along the same lines, here's my thought. All right? Second thing I want you to keep in mind is make sure when you respond to the questions I offer to you in your Thought Primer, that you develop your answers in some amount of detail, right? I'm reading every single word of your Thought Primer, and I'm reading your Thought Primers and looking for a couple of things. One is, are you touching on issues that are really interesting and important and complex that we may need to kind of flesh out together via some back and forth in the Canvas site via your Thought Primer? And then the other is, I'm looking to see like, well, what kinds of interesting insights and questions do you have? Both of those things require that you flesh out your ideas and give me enough to be able to understand kind of where you're coming from and what you're thinking. If I ask you a question like I asked last week, is it possible for a statement to be true for one person or false for another? And you respond to that by saying, like, sure, that's possible. I don't know what to do with that. It's like, well, how do I respond to that other than saying like, well, how is it possible? Or what do you mean? Or could you give me some examples? And so if you can think of those kinds of things ahead of time, think about the kinds of questions that I might ask ahead of time, and then just respond to those, that'll make your Thought Primer that much more awesome. So make sure you're fleshing out your ideas. I think you should be shooting for about a page at least for each one of your Thought Primers, okay? So not single sentences, not just a couple of sentences. You really want to take advantage of the Thought Primers to prime your thinking. And that means fleshing out and developing your ideas. All right. Also, keep in mind, last thing, when you turn in your Thought Primers to me, almost always, as long as you're giving me enough to sort of engage, I'm going to be responding back to you with some questions like, I want to know more about this, or what do you think of this, or how about this scenario here? And I would really encourage you to respond back to those questions that I pose to you, and that way we can have some sort of individualized one-on-one idea exploration via Canvas. All right, have a fantabulous week, and I'm super excited to read your Thought Primers. Again, doing them earlier in the week is better for you in the long run, particularly participating in the discussion board. The more that we get out there, the better, so that we don't just have a flood of posts at 11:50 on Sunday night. All right, so get in there early, get in there often. Have a fantastic week.